The afternoon sun beat down on Daniel the T-Rex, casting long shadows across the enclosure. Restless, Daniel paced back and forth, his powerful jaws snapping shut with silent frustration. He remembered the time before, the endless blue sky and the thrill of the hunt. Now, he was confined to this metal cage, a pale imitation of his past life. A shrill bark pierced the air, and Daniel whipped his head around to see Danny the Albertosaurus bounding towards him. Unlike Daniel, Danny seemed perpetually cheerful, his bright green eyes sparkling with excitement. "Did you hear, Daniel?" Danny panted, skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust. Professor Dan finished working on something new. Intrigued despite himself, Daniel rumbled, "New? What is it?" "I'm not sure," Danny admitted, hopping from one foot to the other. "But I heard screeches coming from the lab all morning." A low growl echoed from the nearby watering hole. Bro the Brachiosaurus lumbered closer, his massive head swaying gently. "What's all the commotion?" he rumbled, his voice calm and deep. Before Danny could answer, a deafening shriek tore through the air. The ground trembled, and the very trees seemed to shudder. Croc, the resident Deinosuchus, emerged from the water with a splash, his reptilian eyes wide with alarm. "What in the world was that?" Bro boomed, his voice laced with concern. Daniel, the memories of his past stirring within him, felt a primal surge of fear. He didn't know what new horror Professor Dan had created, but he knew one thing for certain. They had to find out. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech unlike anything they had heard before pierced the tense silence. A small blue figure swung through the trees, its movements agile and sure. It landed with a thud right in front of the startled dinosaurs. It was a blue orangutan, its fur an odd, electric blue unlike anything they had ever seen. The orangutan stared at the dinosaurs with wide, curious eyes. Before any of them could react, the orangutan opened its mouth and mimicked the deafening shriek exactly. The dinosaurs recoiled in shock. Croc submerged himself back into the water with a startled hiss. Danny, despite himself, let out a yelp. The orangutan tilted its head, seemingly amused by their reaction. Then, it mimicked another sound, the calming rumble of Bro's voice. Daniel and the others exchanged bewildered glances. This blue orangutan wasn't just any primate. It could mimic sounds with uncanny accuracy. Could this strange ability be the key to understanding the mysterious shriek and what dangers it might hold? With a low rumble intended to be soothing, Daniel said, "Hello. What's your name?" The orangutan blinked, surprised. He had never heard such a deep voice before, but it didn't sound threatening. He hesitantly mimicked a high-pitched chirp, then pointed at himself. "Sonic," Daniel guessed, mimicking the chirp back. Sonic's eyes widened further. This giant creature understood him. Relief washed over him, followed by a new determination. He mimicked the sound of clanging metal bars, the sound of their captivity. Daniel understood. He looked at the others, exchanging a silent conversation through their eyes. They desperately wanted to escape. Sonic, with his strange abilities, might be the key. Suddenly, a crackle of electricity filled the air. Professor Dan emerged from the lab, a cruel smile on his face. He raised a strange device towards Sonic, its crackling energy aimed at the defenseless orangutan. Rage surged through Daniel. He wouldn't let this happen. With a mighty roar, he charged towards Professor Dan. But before he could reach him, a plume of fire erupted from Professor Dan's back, propelling him high into the air. He cackled from above, a jetpack strapped to his back. "Foolish creatures," he yelled down. "You'll never escape." Danny, quick as ever, lunged at the device Professor Dan dropped. He tossed it into the nearby pond with a satisfying splash. Meanwhile, Bro carefully nudged Sonic to his feet with his snout. Sonic, though shaken, seemed all right. He looked at the dinosaurs, then at the direction Professor Dan had flown. His eyes narrowed. He mimicked the whirring of a jetpack, then pointed towards the horizon. Daniel's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They had a way to track Professor Dan, but it meant venturing into the unknown. He looked at his companions, a silent question hanging in the air. Were they ready for this adventure? Bro rumbled a low growl, a sound of agreement. Danny, That's a fun twist. While the image you sent is actually a toy crocodile and not a real Deinosuchus, we can certainly incorporate the idea of the dinosaurs finding a jetpack to follow Professor Dan. Here's how you can include this part in your story. Bro rumbled a low growl, a sound of agreement. Danny yipped excitedly, tail wagging. Croc submerged for a moment, then resurfaced with a determined glint in his eyes. Sonic, seeing their resolve, mimicked a sound of encouragement, a series of rhythmic chest thumps, similar to what gorillas do. The group huddled together, their plan forming. We can't fly, Bro rumbled, his voice laced with frustration. How are we supposed to follow that maniac? Sonic, perched on Bro's shoulder, looked around with his bright eyes. Suddenly, he leaped down and pointed towards a group of small birds chirping on a nearby branch. Sonic could mimic the birds' language thanks to his special ability. He spoke to the birds in their high-pitched chirps, frantically explaining their situation. The birds listened patiently, their tiny heads tilting in confusion. Finally, one brave bird chirped a response. Sonic translated for the group. They say they can't carry us, he relayed, but they did see Professor Dan earlier. He was using some strange device that made him fly. A jetpack! Danny exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. We need to find a jetpack. The idea sparked a flurry of activity. The dinosaurs searched high and low, the different sizes and skills proving to be an asset. Bro's sheer height allowed him to peer over obstacles, while Croc could search underwater crevices. Daniel's powerful jaws could break open locked doors, and Danny's speed helped them cover a lot of ground. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Sonic screeched with excitement. He pointed towards a hidden compartment beneath a maintenance shed. Inside, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was a jetpack. Eureka! Danny cried, bounding towards the jetpack. But using a jetpack was entirely different than finding one. The instructions were written in a complex language the dinosaurs couldn't understand. Daniel, ever the resourceful leader, stepped forward. He examined the jetpack carefully, studying the controls and the fuel gauge. Memories of watching Professor Dan use the jetpack flickered in his mind. With a tentative glance at his companions, Daniel reached out a claw and pressed a few buttons. The jetpack whirred to life on his back, emitting a low hum. A rush of wind tousled his feathers as he began to lift off the ground. He hovered for a moment, testing the controls, then with a roar of triumph, he shot up into the sky. The other dinosaurs cheered, hope rekindled in their eyes. With Daniel leading the way, they could pursue Professor Dan and hopefully find a way to freedom. Here's how the story can continue with the thrilling chase and Professor Dan's monstrous transformation. Daniel soared through the air, the jetpack roaring beneath him. Below, he saw Bro lumbering through the forest, Sonic clinging to his back. Croc followed alongside, his powerful jaws snapping at any obstacles in their path. Danny, ever the speed demon, sprinted across the treetops, keeping pace with the flying dinosaurs. Suddenly, Sonic shrieked, pointing towards a distant clearing. There, Professor Dan stood on a rocky outcrop, a smug grin plastered on his face. He raised his jetpack, preparing to blast off. It's over, Dan! Daniel roared, diving towards the mad scientist. Professor Dan cackled. It's not over yet, you overgrown lizards! Just then, a loud bang echoed through the air. Sonic, perched on Bro's shoulder, had snagged a weapon Professor Dan had dropped earlier and, in a moment of surprising bravery, fired it. The bullet struck Professor Dan in the arm, eliciting a surprised yelp. You stupid monkey! Professor Dan shrieked, clutching his wounded arm. But before he could retaliate, he fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a syringe filled with a glowing green liquid. This changes everything, he snarled, injecting the liquid into his own body. A horrifying transformation began. Professor Dan's body contorted and warped. His limbs stretched and bulked, his skin turned a sickly green, and his face twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. When the transformation was complete, a monstrous creature stood before them. It resembled no creature they had ever seen, a Frankenstein's monster stitched together from the parts of various dinosaurs and who knows what else. The ground trembled as the monstrosity roared, its voice a cacophony of animalistic bellows. Sonic whimpered, clinging tighter to Bro's back. Even Daniel felt a flicker of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. "We have to stop him," he roared, rallying his companions. The unlikely heroes, a dinosaur, a crocodile, a brachiosaurus, and a blue orangutan, faced the greatest challenge yet. The battle for their freedom, and perhaps for the safety of the world, was about to begin. "Sure, I can see from the image you sent that the monstrosity is a terrifying creature. It looks like a chimera, a monstrous creature from Greek mythology cobbled together from the parts of various animals. Here's how you can incorporate this creature's design into your story." The ground trembled as the monstrosity roared, its voice a cacophony of animalistic bellows. Sonic whimpered, clinging tighter to Bro's back. Even Daniel felt a flicker of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. "We have to stop him," he roared, rallying his companions. "The monstrous creature you sent me appears to have a lion's head with a powerful mane and razor-sharp teeth, a reptilian body with a long, muscular tail, enormous claws on its hands and feet, large wings on its back. Here's how you can describe the monstrosity's attack and how the group faces this new threat." Professor Dan's transformation was complete. A monstrous creature stood before them, a terrifying chimera unlike anything they had ever seen. Its lion's head roared with fury, a powerful mane framing razor-sharp teeth. A reptilian body coiled beneath it, the muscles rippling with power. Enormous claws glinted on its hands and feet, and leathery wings stretched out from its back, casting an ominous shadow on the ground. The monstrosity let out a bone-chilling shriek and charged. The ground shook with each thunderous step. Fear threatened to consume Daniel, but he forced himself to focus. He had to protect his friends. "Scatter!" he roared, activating his jetpack and propelling himself towards the monstrosity. The other dinosaurs followed suit. Bro took off at a surprising speed, Sonic holding on for dear life. Croc ducked underwater, leaving only ripples in his wake. Danny weaved through the trees, his agility allowing him to evade the monstrosity's swipes. The creature was relentless. It snapped its jaws at Daniel, who dodged just in time, the hot breath scorching his scales. It lashed out with its tail, toppling trees with ease. This was going to be a fight unlike any they had ever faced. But the dinosaurs, along with their unlikely blue orangutan companion, were not about to give up. They would fight together, using their unique skills and their newfound friendship to defeat this monstrous creation and escape Professor Dan's clutches once and for all. That's an epic conclusion to your story. Here's a refined version incorporating the exciting elements you described. The monstrosity roared, its lion's head snapping at Daniel. The T-Rex barely dodged, the hot breath scorching his scales. The creature was a whirlwind of fury, its reptilian body lashing out with its enormous claws, toppling trees like mere twigs. In the face of this monstrous creation, the unlikely heroes fought back. Bro, the gentle giant, stomped his massive feet, shaking the very ground, disrupting the monstrosity's balance. Sonic, perched on Bro's back, unleashed a cacophony of animal sounds, the roars of tigers, the shrieks of eagles, the hisses of snakes, confusing and disorienting the creature. Danny, a blur of green scales, weaved through the monstrosity's legs, nipping at its exposed underbelly. Croc, emerging from the water with a powerful lunge, clamped his jaws onto the monstrosity's tail, tearing a strip of flesh with a sickening rip. Daniel, fueled by a primal rage, focused on the monstrosity's wings. With a mighty roar, he lunged forward, his powerful jaws tearing through the leathery hide, grounding the creature. But the monstrosity wasn't finished yet. Its body began to glow an ominous red. With a final, earth-shattering roar, it exploded in a burst of blinding light and powerful radiation. The dinosaurs were thrown back, battered and bruised. Daniel, closest to the blast, bore the brunt of the attack. He lay there, his body broken, his tiny arms hanging limp at his sides. Just as hope seemed lost, Daniel's eyes fluttered open. He remembered the prototype EMP bomb he'd seen earlier, a weapon Professor Dan had been developing. It was a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, Daniel, using what little strength remained, grabbed the bomb and propelled himself towards the monstrosity's open maw with the jetpack. There was a blinding flash, a deafening roar, and then silence. The smoke cleared to reveal a scene of devastation. The monstrosity lay smoldering, finally defeated. But at what cost? Sorrow filled the air as their companions looked upon Daniel's sacrifice. Danny, tears streaming down his face, let out a mournful cry. They had lost their oldest friend, their leader. Suddenly, a glint in the distance caught Sonic's eye. It was a time machine, Professor Dan's latest creation, hidden amidst the wreckage. The realization dawned on him. This was where they came from. Sonic, despite his grief, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this time machine could take him home. But the dinosaurs, battered and weary, knew this wasn't their world. "This isn't your home, Sonic," Daniel rasped, his voice weak but resolute. "You belong with your own kind." A wave of gratitude washed over Sonic. He had found friendship and acceptance with these extraordinary creatures. He touched Daniel's snout with a small gesture of farewell. Despite their loss, a sense of purpose bloomed within them. They would honor Daniel's sacrifice by returning him and themselves to their own time. With renewed determination, they carefully loaded Daniel onto Bro's back and approached the time machine. A bittersweet journey awaited them, one filled with memories of their fallen friend and the hope of returning home. Yet, their bond, forged in the fires of battle, would forever remain a testament to their courage, their loyalty, and the extraordinary friendship between a T-Rex, an Albertosaurus, a Deinosuchus, a Brachiosaurus, and a blue orangutan who found a home amongst dinosaurs.